I went back home because I'd forgotten my reading glasses on the dining room table. At 70 years old, those little memory lapses have become more frequent than I'd like to admit. I opened the front door carefully, not making a sound, and that's when I heard the voice of my son, Matthew, talking on the phone in the living room. His tone was different. There was something in his laugh that sent a chill down my spine. I froze in the hallway when I heard him say with a laugh full of malice, "I can just imagine her face when she sees the empty account, baby. It's done. I transferred all the money to your account, just like we planned." I felt the floor drop out from under me. My own son, my only son, was talking about me as if I were a stranger, as if I were his victim. I leaned against the hallway wall, trying to process what I had just heard. Matthew continued speaking in that voice I'd never heard from him before, cold and calculating. "Don't worry, Veronica. She never suspected a thing. She trusts me too much. She's always been like that, too naive for her own good." Each word was like a knife straight to the heart. I recognized the name Veronica, his wife, the woman who had come into our lives just 2 years ago with that perfect smile and those sweet words that I now understood were completely fake. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stay standing, to keep listening, even though every word tore me apart inside. $280,000, my love," Matthew continued, his triumphant tone making my stomach churn. "It's everything she had in that main account. It's ours now. We can buy that beach house you wanted so badly, the new car, everything. $280,000. The money my husband and I had saved over 40 years of hard work. The money from the sale of the pharmacy we built from scratch. The money that represented my security, my peace of mind, my future. And my own son had just stolen it from me as if it were the most natural thing in the world." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to overflow. My mind flashed back to the past, to those days when my life was completely different. 5 years ago, when my husband, Robert, died suddenly of a heart attack, I thought I would never recover from the pain. We had built a beautiful life together, full of love, work, and sacrifice. The pharmacy we opened when we were just 25 years old became our pride, our legacy. We worked side by side for decades, serving the community, knowing every customer by name, being a part of their lives. Matthew was our only son, the center of our universe. We raised him with love, but also with values, or so I thought. He was always a smart kid, maybe a little spoiled, but I thought that was normal. When Robert died, Matthew was by my side at the funeral, holding me up when my legs couldn't anymore. He helped me with all the arrangements, with the endless paperwork that follows a death. He was the one who suggested selling the pharmacy. "Mom, you've worked enough. You deserve to rest, to enjoy life," he would tell me in that caring voice that I now knew was pure manipulation. We sold the pharmacy 3 years ago for a considerable sum. I invested part of the money, put another part into savings accounts, and made sure I had a solid financial cushion for my old age. Matthew knew every detail of my finances because I, naive as I was, trusted him completely. He was my son, my blood. I never imagined he could betray me in such a vile and calculated way. 2 years ago, he met Veronica at a business conference. She was younger than him, maybe around 35 years old, with that artificial beauty that comes from expensive plastic surgery and perfect makeup. From the first moment I saw her, something inside me warned me there was something off about her, but I silenced that little voice because I wanted to see my son happy. The wedding was modest but elegant. I paid for a large part of it because Matthew insisted he was going through a rough patch financially in his consulting business. Veronica hugged me that day and called me Mom with tears in her eyes that I now knew were completely fake. She told me she had always dreamed of having a mother-in-law like me, so caring and generous. How foolish I was to believe her, to let myself be drawn in by those sweet words hiding such dark intentions. After the wedding, things began to change subtly. Matthew started visiting me less often. When he did come, he always brought Veronica, and she dominated every conversation. She talked constantly about money, about investments, about real estate. She would ask questions that seemed innocent at the time about my bank accounts, my savings, my plans for the future. I answered honestly because I never imagined I was being sized up, studied, and prepared to be stripped of everything I had. 6 months ago, Matthew suggested something that I now see was the beginning of the final plan. "Mom, you should add me to your main account with power of attorney. That way, if anything happens to you, if you have an emergency, I can help you immediately without any bureaucratic red tape." It sounded reasonable, logical even. At 70 years old, the idea of having someone I trusted with access to my accounts in case of an emergency seemed sensible. I went to the bank with Matthew, signed the papers, and gave him that power he had now used to destroy me. Matthew's voice pulled me from my painful memories. "Yeah, baby, in a few hours I'll go over to my mother's house to check on her. She's probably already been to the bank and discovered the account is empty. I'll pretend to be shocked, tell her it must be a bank error, that we'll look into it together. By the time she figures out the truth, it'll be too late." He laughed again. That laugh I will never forget. That laugh that turned my son into a stranger before my very eyes. I felt something break inside me at that moment. It wasn't just my heart shattering. It was the entire image I had built of my son over 70 years of life. The Matthew I knew, the little boy I nursed when he had a fever, the teenager I helped with his homework, the man I supported in every important decision of his life, simply didn't exist. He had been replaced by this stranger who spoke of robbing me as if it were an accomplishment to be proud of. Tears finally rolled down my cheeks as I listened to him continue to plan my ruin with that woman who called herself my daughter-in-law. "Best of all," Matthew continued in that tone that twisted my insides, "is that she'll never suspect it was intentional. She'll think someone else hacked her account, that it was a bank error, anything but that her own son robbed her. She's too trusting, too innocent. She always has been." Every word was like poison pouring onto an open wound. I wanted to scream, to run into that room and confront him immediately, but something stronger than the pain stopped me. It was rage, yes, but it was also something more calculated, colder. If I went in now and confronted them without concrete proof, without a plan, Matthew could manipulate the situation, convince me I'd misunderstood everything, use my age against me, and make me doubt my own sanity. I backed slowly toward the front door, each step as measured and silent as a thief in my own home. I left with the same care I had used coming in and closed the door without making the slightest sound. Once outside, I had to grab the porch railing because my legs were shaking so badly I thought I would collapse right there. The afternoon sun hit my face, and for a moment, the world seemed too bright, too normal for the tragedy I had just discovered. Neighbors were walking their dogs, kids were playing in the street. Life was going on as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't completely fallen apart in a matter of minutes. I walked to my car on autopilot, not really thinking about where I was going. I sat in the driver's seat and let myself cry for the first time in 5 years, since Robert's death. I cried for the betrayal, for my naivety, for the years of unconditional love I had given to a son who turned out to be capable of stabbing me in the back without the slightest remorse. I cried for Robert, wishing with all my soul he was here with me, though at the same time I was grateful he didn't have to witness this devastating betrayal from his only son. The pain was so intense I felt like I was drowning, that I would never be able to breathe normally again. But then, in the middle of that sea of tears and despair, something began to change inside me. It was like a spark ignited deep in my soul. It wasn't just rage I felt, it was determination. It was the absolute certainty that I would not sit back, that I would not let myself be destroyed by this betrayal. I had survived my husband's death. I had built a business from scratch. I had faced decades of challenges and obstacles. I was not going to let my own son make me his victim without a fight. I angrily wiped away my tears and started the car. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to be smarter than them. As I drove aimlessly through the city streets, my mind started working at full speed. I began to review the last few months with a new clarity, seeing signs I had completely ignored. I remembered how Veronica always found excuses to ask me about my finances. "Oh, Helen, I'm so jealous of your financial stability. How did you manage to save so much? What bank do you use? Do you have investments?" I, fool that I was, answered in great detail, proud to share the financial wisdom Robert and I had accumulated over the years. I never imagined that every answer was one more piece of the puzzle they were building to strip me of everything. I also remembered how Matthew had insisted so much on me giving him power of attorney. The first time he suggested it, I had hesitated. Something inside me told me it wasn't necessary, that I was still perfectly capable of managing my own finances, but he insisted for weeks. "Mom, it's just a precaution. What if you get sick? What if you have an accident? You need someone who can access your accounts in an emergency." Veronica also added to the pressure. "Oh, Mom, Matthew just wants to take care of you. It's normal for kids to help their elderly parents with these things." Elderly. That word had bothered me at the time, but I let it pass. Now I understood it was part of the strategy, to make me feel old, incapable, dependent. I remembered the increasingly infrequent visits. Before marrying Veronica, Matthew used to come see me at least 3 times a week. We'd have coffee together, talk for hours. He'd tell me about his work, his plans, his dreams. After the wedding, the visits dropped to once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and in the last few months, I barely saw him once a month. Every time I asked why he didn't come by more often, he had perfectly crafted excuses. "Work is just so swamped, Mom. Veronica and I are really busy with a new project. You know how it is. Married life has its own demands." The pieces began to fit together with painful clarity. The constant questions about my health, which I once thought were signs of concern, I now saw for what they really were. Attempts to gauge how much longer I'd be around before they could execute their plan without raising suspicion. Veronica's suggestions that I should make a clear and detailed will to avoid legal problems in the future, I now understood were attempts to find out exactly how much money I had and where it was. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly affectionate gesture had been calculated, measured, and designed to get them closer to my money. I pulled into a small park near downtown and turned off the engine. I needed to think clearly, to push away the emotions clouding my judgment. I took out my phone and stared at the screen for several minutes before making a decision. I had to call someone. I needed help, but I had to choose wisely. I couldn't risk Matthew finding out I knew the truth before I was ready to confront him. I dialed Ruth's number without hesitating. Ruth had been my best friend for over 40 years. We met when our kids were in elementary school, and ever since, we had shared everything: joys, sorrows, triumphs, and defeats. If there was one person I could trust completely in this moment of crisis, it was her. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, with her cheerful, warm voice that always comforted me. "Helen, what a nice surprise. I was just thinking of calling you to see about coffee tomorrow." But her tone changed immediately when she heard my trembling voice. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Where are you?" I couldn't hold back the tears again as I told her everything I had heard. Each word came out choked, mixed with sobs I couldn't control. Ruth listened in complete silence, not interrupting me once, and when I finished speaking, the only thing I could hear on the other end was her sharp intake of breath. "That bastard," she finally said, her voice filled with a rage I had never heard from her. "That rotten bastard. Helen, listen to me. You are not going to let them get away with this. I'm on my way right now. Tell me exactly where you are." I gave her the park's location, and she said she'd be there in 15 minutes. While I waited, I tried to calm down, to breathe deeply, to organize my thoughts into something coherent. Ruth arrived in record time. I saw her get out of her car with that determination she always had, and I felt an immense relief knowing I wasn't alone in this. She got into my car, and without a word, hugged me tightly. That hug was like a balm for my shattered soul. I cried on her shoulder for several minutes while she stroked my hair and repeated over and over, "It's okay, my friend. We're going to fix this. You are not going to be left with nothing, I promise you." When I finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, Ruth took my face in her hands and looked me straight in the eyes. "Now listen to me very carefully. I know you're devastated. I know you feel like your world has ended. But we cannot get carried away by emotions. We have to be smart, strategic. Matthew and that viper Veronica think they have you right where they want you, but we're going to show them they are completely wrong." She was right. Tears and pain weren't going to get my money back, and they weren't going to make Matthew face the consequences of his actions. I needed a plan. I needed to act with a clear head and a guarded heart. "The first thing you have to do," Ruth continued, in that practical tone I admired so much, "is go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. You need to talk to someone you trust, someone who can help you understand exactly what transactions were made on your account and if there's any way to reverse them or freeze the money. Do you know someone at the bank who can help you? I thought for a moment and remembered Stephen, the branch manager where I'd had my accounts for over 20 years. He had always been kind and professional with me, and most importantly, he knew my financial history perfectly. Stephen, I said finally, the main branch manager. He's known me for years. He knows I've always been careful with my money. If I explain the situation, I'm sure he'll help me. Ruth nodded in approval. Perfect. First thing tomorrow, you go to the bank and talk to him. In the meantime, tonight you have to act like you don't know anything. If Matthew comes to your house like he said he would, you have to pretend everything is completely normal. You cannot let them suspect you discovered their plan, because that would give them time to move the money somewhere else or to cook up some kind of alibi. Do you think you can do that? The question made me acidity. Could I really look my son in the face and pretend I didn't know he had betrayed me in the most vile way possible? Could I smile and chat normally when all I wanted to do was scream at him to ask him how he could have done this to me? But then I thought of Robert. I thought of all the years we worked together, of all the sacrifices we made to build a secure future. I thought of the nights I'd stayed awake taking care of Matthew when he was sick as a child, of the times I'd gone without so he could have more. I thought of all the love I had given him unconditionally his entire life. And that thought, instead of weakening me, filled me with a strength I didn't know I had. Yes, I told Ruth, my voice much firmer than I felt inside. I can do it. I'm going to do it. That money represents a lifetime of work and sacrifice. I am not going to let them take it from me without a fight. Ruth smiled with pride and squeezed my hand tightly. That's the Helen I know. The strong woman who built a business from scratch, who raised a son on her own after she was widowed, who has always faced problems head on. Now, I'm going to tell you something else, and I want you to burn it into your mind. Matthew stopped being your son the moment he decided to steal from you. You don't owe loyalty to someone who betrayed you like this. What you're doing isn't revenge, it's justice. It's taking back what belongs to you. Her words resonated inside me like a hammer hitting an anvil. She was right. The Matthew I loved, the son I had raised with so much affection, would never have been capable of something like this. This Matthew, who had planned to rob me, was a stranger, and I had to treat him as such. We spent the next hour working out a detailed plan. Ruth had that wonderful ability to think of every detail, every scenario. When you get home, she instructed, act like nothing happened. If Matthew shows up and asks how you are, tell him you're fine, that you had a quiet day. Don't mention you went looking for him. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the bank opens, you go and talk to Stephen. Explain the whole situation. Tell him your son made transfers without your authorization, using the power of attorney you gave him. That's misappropriation of funds. It's a crime. The bank has to help you trace the money and, if possible, freeze it or reverse the transfers. And if it's already too late? I asked, a knot in my throat. What if they've already moved the money somewhere we can't get it back? Ruth shook her head. I don't think so. Matthew said he just made the transfer, right? Banks have protocols for these kinds of situations, especially when it comes to seniors who are victims of financial abuse. Yes, Helen, that's exactly what your son did to you. Financial abuse of an elder. It's a serious crime, and the bank is obligated to help you. The thought of my own son going to jail turned my stomach, but at the same time, I felt a strange satisfaction at the thought of him finally facing the consequences of his actions. You also need to document everything, Ruth continued, pulling a notebook from her purse. Write down exactly what you heard today in as much detail as possible. The date, the time, the exact words they said. That will be important if this goes to court. And one more thing. From now on, record all your conversations with Matthew and Veronica. Use your phone, leave it recording in your purse or your pocket. You need hard proof of what they did. The idea of recording my own son seemed surreal, like something out of a spy movie, but I understood it was necessary. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to get back what was mine, I needed irrefutable proof. We stayed in the park until it started to get dark, refining every detail of the plan. Ruth insisted I had to stay calm at all times, that I couldn't let Matthew see any sign that I knew the truth. You're an actress for one night, she told me with a sad smile. The performance of your life. make him believe he's still in control, that his plan worked perfectly. Meanwhile, we'll be working in the shadows to turn the tables on him. Finally, when the sky was completely dark, I felt ready to go home. Ruth followed me in her car to make sure I got there safely, and before we said goodbye, she made me promise to call her as soon as I finished talking to Stephen the next day. I walked into my house with my heart beating so hard, I was afraid it could be heard from outside. The lights were on, and I recognized Matthew's car parked out front. I took 3 deep breaths, just as Ruth had taught me, and pushed open the door with a calm I absolutely did not feel. Matthew was sitting in the living room, looking at his phone with an expression of absolute tranquility that made my stomach churn. When he saw me come in, he looked up and gave me that smile that had brightened my days so many times, and which now only made me feel sick. "Hi, Mom. Where have you been? I called you a few times, but you didn't answer." It took every ounce of self-control I had not to lunge at him and demand an explanation. Instead, I smiled as naturally as I could and set my purse down on the dining room table. I went to visit Ruth. You know how she is. When she starts talking, time just flies by, and we didn't even notice the hours. The lie came out of my mouth with an ease that surprised me. Matthew nodded without the slightest suspicion. "Oh, that's great. I'm glad you're spending time with your friends. Mom, it's important for you to have a social life." His words sounded sweet, concerned, exactly like the loving son I thought I had until just a few hours ago. I wondered how many times in the last few months he had used that same fake tone with me, without me even noticing. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one where I spent my afternoons reading or watching the news, and tried to act as normal as possible. "And what are you doing here at this hour? Shouldn't you be home with Veronica?" Matthew shrugged nonchalantly. "She went out with some friends, and I thought I'd come visit you. It's been a while since we spent time together." How ironic, I thought bitterly. He's barely visited me in months, and today, the day he stole all my money, he decided it was a good time for a family visit. Of course, I now understood his real intentions perfectly. He wanted to be here when I discovered my account was empty. He wanted to see my reaction, to feign surprise and concern, to play the part of the devoted son who would do anything to help his poor, victimized mother. "How sweet of you, honey," I managed to say, though the words burned my throat. "Do you want me to make some dinner? I have some chicken in the fridge. I can make that stew you used to love so much when you were a boy." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe discomfort, or maybe guilt, but it vanished so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "Don't trouble yourself, Mom. I already ate, but we could have some coffee if you want." I stood up and walked to the kitchen, grateful for a few moments alone to compose myself. My hands were shaking as I made the coffee, and I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming in frustration and pain. While I waited for the coffee to brew, my mind traveled to the past once more. I remembered the day Matthew was born, how Robert and I cried with joy holding him for the first time. I remembered his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I remembered comforting him through his first broken heart when he was 16, how I supported him when he decided to study business instead of medicine like his father wanted. I remembered every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment of his life where I was present, loving him unconditionally, sacrificing for him without expecting anything in return. At what point did all that love turn into something he could betray so easily? At what point did I stop being his mother and become just a source of money he could exploit without the slightest remorse? The question tormented me, but I had no answer. Or maybe the answer was too painful to accept, that my son had always been capable of this, and I had simply refused to see the signs because a mother's love can be blind to her children's faults. I thought of all the times Robert had been stricter with Matthew, and I had defended him. "He's just a boy," I would say. "He'll mature, he'll learn." How many chances had I given him to learn to be a better person, and he had simply chosen this path. I returned to the living room with 2 steaming cups of coffee and sat down across from Matthew. He was still looking at his phone, probably texting Veronica to tell her everything was going according to plan. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, trying to make normal conversation. Matthew looked up and nodded. "Yeah, Mom, everything's perfect. In fact, things are going so well that Veronica and I are thinking about buying a bigger house. You know, thinking about the future, maybe having kids. The mention of a bigger house confirmed exactly what they were going to use my money for. They had probably already been looking at properties, planning how to spend what they stole from me. "That's wonderful, honey," I managed to say, though I felt like I was choking. "It's always good to plan for the future. Your father and I were always very careful with our money. That's why we were able to build a stable life." I saw Matthew look away, unable to meet my eyes. Well, I thought bitterly, at least he still has a shred of shame left. "Speaking of money, Mom," Matthew said after an uncomfortable silence, "how are your finances? Everything okay with your bank accounts? You haven't had any problems?" There it was, the question I'd been waiting for since he arrived. He wanted to know if I had already discovered the theft. He wanted to prepare himself to react. I took a sip of coffee to give myself time to think of my answer. I had to be convincing. I had to make him believe I knew nothing. "No, honey, everything is just fine. You know I check my accounts once a month when the statement comes in the mail. I don't like going online all the time. All that technology makes me nervous." The lie worked perfectly. Matthew visibly relaxed, his shoulders dropped, and that fake smile returned to his face. "You're right, Mom. At your age, it's better not to complicate things. But if you ever need help with anything at the bank, you know you can count on me." At your age, those words hurt more than he probably intended. He was infantilizing me, making me feel incapable, all part of his strategy to justify what he had done. We spent the next hour talking about trivial things. Matthew told me about his work, about his plans with Veronica, about places they wanted to visit. I nodded and smiled at the right moments, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about how I was going to confront him, how I was going to get my money back, and how I was going to make him pay for what he had done. When he finally got up to leave, he hugged me and kissed my forehead, just as he had 1,000 times before. "I love you so much, Mom. Take care." Those words, which once would have filled me with warmth, now just sent a shiver down my spine. I closed the door behind him and collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted. I had managed to act normal, I had managed to keep him from suspecting anything, but the effort had left me completely empty. I took out my phone and sent a text to Ruth. "I did it." He acted normal. "Going to the bank tomorrow." Her reply came back immediately. "I'm proud of you. Tomorrow, your recovery begins. Get some rest tonight. You're going to need it." I tried to follow her advice, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Matthew's life, looking for signs I should have seen. I remembered when he was 12 years old, and I caught him stealing money from my purse. At the time, I justified it as childish curiosity, as a mistake any kid could make. Robert wanted to punish him harshly, but I intervened. "He's just a boy," I said. "He'll learn it's wrong." Now I wondered if that had been the first sign of what was to come, if my leniency back then had planted the seed for what was now a full-blown betrayal. I also remembered when he was 20, and we helped him pay off his credit card debt. He had spent uncontrollably, living beyond his means, and when he couldn't pay, we covered it all so he wouldn't ruin his credit. At the time, I thought I was being a good mother, protecting him from the consequences of his youthful mistakes. Now I saw that all I had done was teach him that someone would always be there to bail him out of his bad decisions. I woke up at 6 in the morning after barely 3 hours of restless sleep filled with nightmares. In my dreams, Matthew was a little boy again, and I was trying to reach him, but he kept moving further away, laughing as I desperately screamed his name. I got up with a headache and an aching body, as if I had aged 10 years in a single night. I made a strong cup of coffee and sat down to wait for the bank to open. I had decided to arrive at exactly 9 o'clock, as soon as the doors opened, to talk to Stephen before the place filled up with customers, so I could have his full attention. By 8:30, I was ready, dressed in my beige suit that always made me feel more confident and professional. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. My eyes were swollen from the previous night's tears, and my face showed every one of my 70 years with brutal clarity. But there was something else in that gaze, something I hadn't seen in a long time, pure, hard determination. I put on some makeup to hide the dark circles, combed my hair carefully, and left the house with my head held high. Ruth had sent me an early text. "Thinking of you. Call me as soon as you leave the bank. You are strong, you are brave, you are going to get back what is yours." The drive to the bank felt endless. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed increased my anxiety. What if it was too late? What if Matthew had already moved the money somewhere inaccessible? What if the bank refused to help me because I had given my son power of attorney myself? The questions tormented me, but I tried to stay calm. I remembered Ruth's words. I needed to be serene, articulate, convincing. I couldn't show up like a confused, emotional old woman. I had to present myself as what I was, an intelligent, capable woman who had been the victim of a crime and was demanding justice. I arrived at the bank at exactly 9 o'clock. The security guard, a man named Mark who had known me for years, greeted me with his usual kindness. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez. You're in early today." I returned the greeting with a smile I hoped looked natural and headed straight for Stephen's desk. He was reviewing some documents on his computer, but he looked up as I approached and received me with a professional smile. "Mrs. Martinez, what a pleasure to see you. How can I help you today?" I sat down across from him and took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Stephen, I need to talk to you about something very serious that happened with my account," I began, my voice firm despite the tremor I felt inside. "My son made transfers from my account without my authorization, and I need to know exactly what happened and what I can do to get my money back." I saw Stephen's expression change immediately from professional cordiality to genuine concern. "Without your authorization? But, Mrs. Martinez, your son Matthew has power of attorney over your main account. Any transaction he makes is legally valid because you granted him that right." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, even though I was expecting them. "I know," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "I gave him that power thinking it was for emergencies so he could help me if I ever needed it. I never imagined he would use it to rob me." Stephen was quiet for a moment, processing what I was telling him. Then he typed something into his computer, his brow furrowing as he looked at the screen. "I see here that there were indeed 3 large transfers from your account in the last 2 weeks. The most recent was yesterday afternoon, for $140,000. The 2 previous ones were 10 and 15 days ago, for $80,000 and $60,000 respectively. All of them went to an account in the name of Veronica Mendez." My daughter-in-law's full name coming from Stephen's lips made it all feel even more real, more painful. $280,000. All of my liquid assets transferred to the account of that woman who had earned my trust only to destroy me. "I need you to help me block that account and get my money back," I told Stephen, urgency in my voice. "Matthew robbed me. He used the power I gave him in good faith to strip me of everything I have. There has to be something you can do." Stephen ran his hands over his face, looking worried. "Mrs. Martinez, this is very delicate. Legally, your son had the right to make those transfers because you granted him power of attorney. However, if you are claiming it was a breach of trust and misappropriation, then we are talking about a crime. But for the bank to be able to act, we need you to file a formal complaint with the authorities." The word complaint echoed in my head. To report my own son meant potentially sending him to jail, destroying his life, branding him forever with a criminal record. But then I remembered his voice on the phone the day before, that cruel laugh as he said he could imagine my face when I found the account empty. I remembered how he had meticulously planned everything with Veronica, how he had used my love and trust against me. I remembered the 40 years Robert and I worked to build that nest egg, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the things we went without. "I'll file the complaint," I said, my voice firm and clear. "Matthew stopped being my son when he decided to rob me. I am going to do whatever it takes to get back what is mine and to make him face the consequences of his actions." I saw a flicker of admiration in Stephen's eyes. He had probably seen cases of financial abuse against seniors before, but maybe this was the first time he'd seen a victim so determined to fight back. Stephen began to explain the process patiently. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to immediately freeze your account so no more transfers can be made. Second, I'll generate a full report of all transactions from the last 3 months so you have detailed documentation. Third, I'm going to contact the bank's fraud department to inform them of the situation. They will launch an internal investigation. And fourth, You will need to go today to file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. With that complaint, the bank can attempt to freeze or trace the money that was transferred to your daughter-in-law's account. I nodded, taking mental notes of each step. It was a complicated process, but at least there was a path forward, a chance for justice. Is there any chance of recovering the money? I asked, my voice trembling. Stephen sighed before answering. It depends on several factors. If the money is still in the destination account and we manage to freeze it before they move it, yes, there's a good chance. But if they've already transferred it to another account or withdrawn it as cash, it will be much more complicated. Time is critical here, Mrs. Martinez. The faster you act, the better your chances of recovering your assets. His words filled me with a renewed urgency. I couldn't waste another minute. Can you do all of that right now? Freeze the account? Generate the reports? Contact the fraud department? Stephen nodded and began working immediately on his computer. While Stephen typed and made phone calls, my mind wouldn't stop working. I wondered what Matthew and Veronica were doing at that very moment. Had they already tried to move the money somewhere else? Were they celebrating their victory? Or maybe, just maybe, Matthew was feeling some remorse for what he had done. I dismissed that last thought immediately. The Matthew I had heard on the phone had no room for remorse. He was cold, calculating, and capable of laughing at the pain he was about to cause his own mother. That was not the son I had raised, or maybe it always was, and I had simply refused to see it. Done, Stephen said after almost 30 minutes of intense work. Your main account is frozen. Nobody can make transactions from it, not even you for the time being, until the legal situation is resolved. Here is the complete report of all transactions from the last 3 months. As you can see, the 3 large transfers I mentioned were the only unusual operations. Before that, your account showed a very stable and predictable pattern, exactly as you've managed it all these years. He handed me a folder with several printed documents, which I tucked carefully into my purse. I also contacted the fraud department. They will call you within the next 24 hours to conduct a more detailed investigation. And here is the address and phone number for the DA's Financial Crimes Unit. You need to go today and file your formal complaint. I stood up from the chair, my legs still shaky, but with a new determination in my heart. Thank you, Stephen. You don't know how much I appreciate your help at this difficult time. He stood up as well, and took my hands in a fatherly gesture. Mrs. Martinez, I've known you for many years. I know you are a responsible and careful person with your money. What your son did to you is unforgivable. I sincerely hope you get back what is yours, and that he faces the consequences of his actions. His words comforted me more than he probably knew. I left the bank with the folder of documents clutched to my chest as if it were an invaluable treasure. As soon as I left the bank, I called Ruth and told her everything that had happened. She listened intently, and when I finished, she said in a firm voice, "Perfect, Helen. Now you go straight to the DA's office and file that complaint. I'm heading there too. I don't want you to face this alone. I'll meet you at the entrance in half an hour." Her unconditional support gave me renewed strength. I drove to the district attorney's office with my heart racing. Every traffic light, every turn, brought me closer to the moment when I would have to officially state that my son was a thief, that the person who had come from my body and to whom I had dedicated my entire life had betrayed me in the vilest way. Ruth was already waiting for me when I arrived. She hugged me tightly, and we walked into the building together. The place was full of people, all with their own tragedies and problems. A young woman was crying in a corner while talking on the phone. An older man stared into space with a lost expression. I wondered how many of those people had also been betrayed by their own loved ones. How many stories of pain and deception were hidden behind every face in that waiting room. We went to the information desk, and a woman with a tired expression attended to us. "I'm here to file a report for misappropriation and financial abuse," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman handed us some forms and told us to wait to be called. We sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, and I began to fill out the paperwork with trembling hands. Every line I wrote was like driving a knife into my own heart. Name of complainant, Helen Martinez. Name of the accused, Matthew Martinez. My son. Relationship to the accused, mother. That last word made me pause. Mother. What a cruel irony. Mothers are supposed to protect their children, not report them to the police. But then I remembered that children are also supposed to care for their parents, especially in their old age, not steal everything they have. We waited for almost 2 hours before we were called. A young prosecutor named Jessica received us in her office. She had a serious but kind look that made me feel like I might be taken seriously. I gave her all the documents Stephen had given me at the bank and began to tell her the whole story from the beginning. I told her about how Matthew had convinced me to give him power of attorney, about how I had overheard his phone conversation with Veronica, about the transfers totaling $280,000. Jessica took notes constantly, asking me specific questions about dates, amounts, and details. "Mrs. Martinez," Jessica said after listening to me for almost an hour, "what you're describing is a clear case of elder financial abuse and misappropriation. The fact that your son had power of attorney does not give him the right to use that power for his own benefit without your knowledge or consent. We are opening a formal investigation, and I am immediately requesting a freeze on the account where the money was deposited." Her words filled me with hope. Finally, someone in a position of authority was taking my situation seriously, validating my pain and my outrage. "How long will all this take?" I asked anxiously. Jessica sighed before answering. "Legal processes can be slow, I won't lie to you. But given that we have clear documentation and the crime is recent, we are going to act quickly. Within the next 48 hours, we should be able to freeze the destination account and bring your son and daughter-in-law in for questioning. We are also going to request a warrant to review all of their recent financial movements." The idea of Matthew and Veronica being brought in for questioning stirred mixed feelings in me. On one hand, I felt a satisfaction that they would finally face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, the pain of a mother who had failed to raise an honest son was tearing me apart. We left the DA's office 3 hours after we arrived. I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but I also felt a strange relief. I had taken the first step. I had made my official complaint. I had set the wheels of justice in motion. Ruth insisted we go get something to eat, as I hadn't had a bite all day. We sat in a quiet little restaurant, and she ordered for both of us because I didn't even have the energy to read the menu. "I'm so proud of you," Ruth said, taking my hand across the table. "I know this is the hardest thing you've ever had to do, but you are doing the right thing." "The right thing?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "I just reported my own son to the police. What kind of mother does that?" Ruth squeezed my hand harder. "A mother who respects herself. A mother who understands that love doesn't mean enabling abuse. A mother who knows that letting Matthew get away with this wouldn't just hurt you. It would turn him into a criminal who could do the same thing to other people in the future." Her words made sense, but the pain was still unbearable. I thought of all the mothers who had to face the reality that their children were not who they believed them to be. How do you survive that kind of betrayal? How do you rebuild a life after that kind of disillusionment? As we ate in silence, my phone started to ring. It was Matthew. My heart leaped into my throat. Did he already know what I had done? Had he gotten a notification from the bank? I looked at Ruth for guidance, and she nodded. "Answer it, but don't tell him anything yet. Keep acting normal." I took a deep breath and answered the call, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. "Hello, honey." Matthew's voice sounded tense, worried, completely different from the confidence he'd had the day before. "Mom, did you try to use your bank account today? Because I got a notification that the account is frozen. I called the bank, but they said they couldn't give me any information and that you had to call." There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. Matthew had discovered his plan hadn't gone as perfectly as he thought. "Frozen?" I said, feigning surprise. "No. I haven't tried to use the account today. Why would it be frozen?" I heard Matthew breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Mom. It must be a bank error. Do you want me to come over, and we can go to the bank together to clear this up?" The irony of his offer would have made me laugh if I weren't so angry. "Don't worry, honey. I'll take care of it. I'll go to the bank tomorrow and ask. It's probably just some system glitch." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you sure, Mom? I can come over right now if you want." "I'm sure. Thanks for worrying." I hung up the phone, and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Perfect, Ruth said with a satisfied smile. Now he knows something didn't go as planned, but he doesn't know exactly what. That's going to make him nervous. He's going to make mistakes. And in the meantime, justice is already in motion. We finished eating, and Ruth insisted on taking me home. When we got there, she made me promise to call her if Matthew or Veronica showed up. You are not alone in this, she reminded me before she left. You have my help whenever you need it. That night I sat in my empty living room, in the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. I looked at the photographs decorating the walls. Matthew as a baby, Matthew at his graduation, Matthew on his wedding day. All those images of a life that now seemed like a lie. When exactly had it all broken? Had it been gradual, or was there a specific moment when my son had turned into this person capable of betraying me? I would probably never have those answers. 2 days passed in agonizing suspense before Jessica called me again. Her voice was professional, but there was an urgent tone that immediately put me on high alert. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to come to my office as soon as possible. We've discovered something important during our investigation. My heart began to pound as I quickly got ready to leave. I called Ruth, and she insisted on coming with me. On the way to the DA's office, my mind raced, imagining what Jessica could have discovered. Had they found more looted accounts? More victims? Or maybe Matthew had managed to move the money, and there was no way to get it back. When we got to Jessica's office, we found an unexpected surprise. There was a man sitting in one of the chairs, an elderly gentleman of about 75 years old, looking defeated and tired. Jessica had us come into her office along with him and formally introduced us. Mrs. Martinez, this is Edward Harris. Mr. Harris, this is Helen Martinez. I believe you both have something very important in common. The man looked at me with eyes full of sadness and shame before extending his hand to greet me. There was something in his gaze I recognized immediately because it was the same pain I saw in the mirror every morning, the mark of betrayal. Jessica sat behind her desk and began to explain in a grave voice. During our investigation into Veronica Mendez, we discovered she was married previously, 4 years ago. Her husband at the time was Mr. Harris's son. The pattern was exactly the same as with you, Mrs. Martinez. Veronica convinced Mr. Harris's son that his father was too old to manage his own finances. She manipulated him until he gained power of attorney over his father's accounts, and then, little by little, they began to transfer money. By the time Mr. Harris realized what was happening, they had already taken over $120,000. His son and Veronica disappeared. They divorced shortly after, and Mr. Harris never filed a complaint. I felt the room spin around me. I looked at Edward with a mixture of horror and compassion. Why didn't you report it? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. The man looked down, ashamed. Because he was my son, ma'am. I thought if I reported him, his life would be ruined forever. I thought maybe, over time, he would mature, that he would regret it and pay me back. But it never happened. He left the country with the money, and I never heard from him again. When I found out Veronica had married again, and what she had done to you, I knew I had to speak up. I can't let her keep destroying families, keep turning children against their parents. Tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks, and I felt an immediate connection with this man who had lived through my same hell. This completely changes the nature of the case, Jessica continued, her tone serious. We're no longer talking about an isolated incident. Veronica has an established pattern of manipulation and fraud. This is pure premeditation. She specifically targets men who have elderly parents with assets, marries them, manipulates them into robbing their own parents, and then disappears with the money. She's a professional con artist. And your son, Matthew, Mrs. Martinez, is her accomplice, although he is likely a victim of her manipulation to some extent as well. Those words gave me a small sliver of hope that maybe Matthew wasn't a complete monster. Maybe he had been manipulated by a woman more calculating and experienced than he was. But then I remembered the conversation I'd overheard, the way Matthew laughed imagining my face when I found the account empty. No, he wasn't just a victim. He had participated actively. He had enjoyed planning my ruin. What does this mean for my case? I asked Jessica urgently. It means we have a much stronger case, she replied, satisfaction in her voice. With Mr. Harris's testimony and the documentation from that prior case, we can prove a pattern of criminal behavior. We've already obtained a court order to completely freeze the account where your money is deposited. Veronica tried to transfer the funds 2 days ago, but the transaction was rejected. Now she's desperate, trying to figure out what happened. And Matthew? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Matthew was subpoenaed yesterday for questioning, but he didn't show up. He sent a lawyer in his place, claiming he was sick. His lawyer says it was all a misunderstanding, that as power of attorney, he had the right to manage your money, that you had given him verbal permission to make the transfers. Of course, we don't believe him, especially now that we have Mr. Harris's testimony demonstrating Veronica's modus operandi. I turned to Edward. Your son also claimed you gave him permission? The man nodded sadly. He said I was senile, that I didn't remember giving him authorization. He used my age against me. And I felt so ashamed, so humiliated, that I preferred to just let it go and not fight. I took Edward's wrinkled hand in mine. This time will be different. This time, we are going to fight together, and we are going to make sure Veronica pays for what she did to both of us. I saw his eyes fill with tears again, but this time, there was something more than sadness in them. There was hope, there was gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. Thank you for having the courage I didn't. If my testimony can help you get your money back and put her in jail, I will give it gladly. Ruth, who had been quiet this whole time, wiped away the tears rolling down her cheeks. It was a heartbreaking but powerful scene. 2 elderly people, united against the injustice they had suffered. Jessica explained the next steps. We're bringing Veronica in for questioning tomorrow morning. She can no longer refuse, because we have enough evidence to arrest her if she doesn't cooperate. We're also issuing a warrant for Matthew's arrest if he doesn't present himself voluntarily within the next 24 hours. With Mr. Harris's testimony, we have enough to prove Veronica is a serial con artist and that Matthew is her accomplice. Your money will be recovered and returned. Her words filled me with a satisfaction I had never felt before. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking simple, pure justice. We left the DA's office with Edward, and we invited him to get a coffee. We needed to talk, to share our stories, to heal together in some small way. We sat in a quiet coffee shop, and Edward began to tell us his full story. My son's name was Daniel. He was a good boy until he met Veronica. She was like a poison that slowly seeped into his mind. At first, I found her pleasant, polite, but there was something in her eyes that bothered me. She was always calculating, sizing things up. When they started asking me for money for supposed emergencies, I gave it to them without a second thought because I trusted my son. I never imagined they were systematically robbing me. How did you find out the truth? I asked. Edward sighed deeply before answering. One day, I went to the bank to withdraw money to pay for a surgery I urgently needed. The teller looked confused and told me my account was practically empty. I thought it was a mistake, that someone had hacked my account. But when they checked the transactions, they all had Daniel's authorization as my power of attorney. I confronted my son that same night, and he denied everything. He said I was confused, that I had probably made the withdrawals myself and just didn't remember. Veronica was right there, watching me with that fake smile while my son called me senile and told me I needed psychiatric help. And what did you do? Ruth asked softly. Nothing. I was so humiliated, so ashamed that I just stayed quiet. I let them go with my money because I couldn't stand the thought of an entire world knowing my own son had robbed me. It was the worst decision of my life. I didn't just lose my money, I lost my dignity. I've lived these last 4 years on a miserable pension, barely surviving, while my son and that woman were probably spending my money on luxuries. His story was heartbreaking, and made me even more determined not to make the same mistake. The next day, I got a call early in the morning. It was Jessica, and her voice sounded triumphant. Mrs. Martinez, I have excellent news. Veronica was arrested this morning while trying to leave the country. They found her at the airport with suitcases full of cash and jewelry she apparently bought with the stolen money. Matthew was with her. They are both in custody and will be processed formally this afternoon. The cash they were carrying was confiscated as evidence, and we are tracing all the purchases they made in recent weeks to recover as much as possible. My legs nearly gave out when I heard the news. Finally, after days of anguish and pain, justice was beginning to become a reality. Ruth arrived at my house minutes after I hung up with Jessica. She had developed an almost psychic ability to know when I needed her. I told her everything, my voice choked with emotion. We both cried. But this time, they weren't tears of pain, but of relief and justice. "I knew you would do it," Ruth said, hugging me tight. "I knew your strength would win in the end. Now Matthew and that viper are going to face the consequences of their actions." We spent the morning talking, drinking coffee, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few weeks. It was almost surreal to think that just a week ago, my life was normal, or what I believed was normal. Jessica called me again around noon to ask me to come to the DA's office that afternoon for the arraignment. "It's important that you're present," she said. "Matthew has asked to speak with you before the hearing. Of course, you are not obligated to see him if you don't want to, but I thought you should know." My first instinct was to refuse flatly. What could Matthew possibly say to me that would justify what he had done? What words could repair the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation? But then I thought that maybe I needed that closure. I needed to look him in the eyes one last time and tell him everything I felt. "I'll see him," I told Jessica, my voice firm. "But I want Ruth to be present with me. I'm not facing him alone." Jessica agreed and scheduled us for 3 in the afternoon. The hours until then passed with torturous slowness. I changed my clothes 3 times, unable to decide what to wear. What does one wear to confront the son who betrayed you? I finally settled on a dark gray dress that made me feel serious and respectable. I looked in the mirror and practiced what I would say. I had rehearsed 1,000 conversations in my mind over the last few days, but now that the moment was near, all the words seemed inadequate. Ruth and I arrived at the DA's office at exactly 3. Jessica met us and led us to a small interrogation room. "Matthew is in the next room," she explained. "You have 30 minutes. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Remember, Mrs. Martinez, anything said in here can be used as evidence in the trial, so be careful with your words." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could control my emotions when I saw Matthew. The door opened, and there he was, my son, in handcuffs and looking completely different from the man I knew. His face was gaunt, he had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were wrinkled. But what struck me most was his gaze. The arrogance and confidence were gone. There was only fear and what looked like genuine remorse. "Mom," Matthew said, his voice breaking as soon as he saw me. He tried to step toward me, but the handcuffs stopped him. I remained standing near the door, with Ruth at my side holding my arm. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Seeing him like this, so reduced and defeated, stirred such contradictory feelings in me that I didn't know if I wanted to hug him or slap him. "Mom, please," Matthew continued, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You have to listen to me. I need to explain what happened." I found my voice, and when I spoke, it sounded cold and distant, even to my own ears. "Explain it to me then. Explain how my own son, whom I loved and cared for his entire life, could steal everything I had. Explain how you could laugh, imagining my face when I found the account empty." Matthew looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't want to do it, Mom. You have to believe me. Veronica manipulated me. She convinced me that you had more money than you needed, that you deserved to live more modestly in your old age. She made me believe we were just taking what would eventually be my inheritance anyway." His words filled me with a rage so intense I felt I might explode. "Your inheritance?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. "Is that how you justify stealing from your own mother? By thinking it was money that would be yours someday anyway?" "Matthew, that money represented my security, my peace of mind, my ability to age with dignity. Your father and I worked 40 years to build that nest egg, and you took it as if it was yours by right, as if I had no right to enjoy it or decide what to do with it. I know, Mom. I know, and I am so sorry. I swear Veronica poisoned my mind. She showed me a lifestyle I desperately wanted, and she convinced me the only way to get it was by taking your money. But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you, I thought. I thought somehow it would all be fine, that you would never find out, or that I'd find a way to pay you back eventually. His excuses sounded hollow and pathetic. You never wanted to hurt me? I said in disbelief. Matthew, I heard you on the phone, laughing about me, imagining my suffering. That wasn't Veronica talking. That was you. Your voice, your words, your cruel laugh. You can't blame her for everything when you participated actively and enthusiastically. Matthew slumped into the chair and buried his face in his cuffed hands. You're right. I can't just blame Veronica. I made the decisions. I made the transfers. I betrayed you. And now I'm going to pay for it. Probably with years in prison. My life is ruined, my reputation destroyed, my career over. But the worst part of all is that I lost the most important person in my life. I lost my mother, and that hurts me more than any punishment they can give me. His words might have softened my heart at another time in my life, but that time had passed. The woman who had been his unconditional mother had died the day I heard that phone conversation. You are going to prison, Matthew, I told him, my voice firm and cold. You are going to pay for what you did, and when you get out, if you ever get out, don't expect to find the mother you knew. That woman doesn't exist anymore. You killed her with your betrayal. Matthew looked up, and I saw a pain in his eyes so deep that for a moment I felt something like compassion, but I crushed it immediately. Mom, please, he begged. I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I know I don't deserve it. I just ask that one day, when I've paid my debt to society and to you, you give me a chance to show you I can change, that I can be the son I should have always been. I looked at this man who had been my baby, my child, my teenager, my adult son, and I felt as if I were looking at a stranger. I can't promise you anything, Matthew. Right now, all I feel is pain and disappointment. Maybe someday, many years from now, I can find some peace with all this. But forgiveness. I don't know if I can ever give you that. I turned to leave, but Matthew called my name one last time. Mom, the money. It's almost all there in the account they froze. We only spent about $20,000 on those jewels they confiscated. The rest is there. Jessica says you're going to get it all back. At least there's that. At least I didn't leave you with nothing. His words didn't console me. The money was important, yes, but what he had taken from me went far beyond dollars and cents. I left that room with Ruth holding me up because my legs could barely carry me. In the hallway, I collapsed into a chair and cried as I hadn't in weeks. I cried for the son I had lost, for the relationship that would never be the same, for the years of unconditional love that had been betrayed. Ruth just held me and let me cry on her shoulder, saying nothing. Sometimes, words are useless when the pain is that deep. Jessica approached after a few minutes and waited patiently for me to calm down. The arraignment is in an hour, she said softly. Do you feel strong enough to attend, or would you prefer the prosecutor represent you without your presence? I took a deep breath and dried my tears. I'll be there, I said with renewed determination. I need to see this through to the end. The hearing was exactly as difficult as I had imagined. Seeing Matthew and Veronica standing before the judge, hearing the formal charges of misappropriation, fraud, and financial elder abuse was like living a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Veronica kept a hard, defiant expression throughout the entire hearing, showing not the slightest trace of remorse. It was as if she had finally dropped the mask, and now I could see her true face, that of a cold, calculating predator. Matthew, on the other hand, kept his head down the entire time, unable to look me in the eye. The judge heard all the testimony, reviewed the evidence, and finally gave his decision. They would both be held on remand until the trial, which was set for 3 months later. Bail was set at an amount so high, I knew neither of them could pay it. Edward was also present at the hearing, and his testimony was devastating. He spoke with a trembling but firm voice about how his son, Daniel, and Veronica had left him destitute, about the years of shame and humiliation he had lived with in silence. When he finished speaking, the judge looked at him with compassion and assured him that this time, justice would not fail. Mr. Harris, I am deeply sorry you have had to live with this injustice for 4 years. While it is too late to prosecute your son, who is apparently out of the country, I am going to make sure Miss Mendez pays for all her crimes, including the one she committed against you. The judge's words gave Edward something he hadn't had in years: validation and hope. Jessica was brilliant in presenting the case. She showed Veronica's pattern of behavior, the similarities between my case and Edward's, the clear premeditation in every step of their plan. She also presented evidence that Veronica had been researching other wealthy seniors in the city, possibly looking for her next victim. There were lists of names on her computer, addresses, and financial information she could only have obtained illegally. It was a much larger criminal operation than anyone had initially imagined. The judge ordered a full investigation to identify if there were more victims who had not come forward. 3 months later, the day of the trial arrived. In that time, my life had changed in ways I never imagined. Jessica had managed to recover almost all of my money. The $260,000 that hadn't been spent was returned to my account, and the jewelry they had bought with the remaining $20,000 was sold to recover most of that amount. In the end, I only lost about $5,000, an insignificant amount compared to what it could have been. But the money was the least of it. What I had truly lost was priceless. Trust in my son, the innocence of believing that family love was unbreakable, the peace of mind of feeling secure in my own old age. The trial was quick because the evidence was overwhelming. Veronica was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, misappropriation, and running a criminal enterprise dedicated to the financial abuse of elders. During the investigation, they had found connections to other similar cases in different states. Matthew received a 5-year sentence, which was partially reduced because he had cooperated with the investigation and had shown genuine remorse. The judge also considered that he had been partially manipulated by Veronica, though he made it clear that did not absolve him of his responsibility. "Mr. Martinez," the judge said in a severe tone, "you betrayed the person who loved you most in this world. You betrayed your mother, the woman who gave you life and dedicated her entire existence to caring for you. That is a crime that goes beyond the legal. It is a moral crime that will haunt you for the rest of your life." When the judge read the sentences, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, yes, but at what cost? My son was going to prison. The family I once had was destroyed forever. But I also knew I had done the right thing. By reporting Matthew and Veronica, I hadn't just protected my own assets, I had stopped them from destroying other families. I had given a voice to victims like Edward, who had suffered in silence. I had shown that elderly people are not easy targets, that we have dignity and the right to defend ourselves. After the trial, Edward approached me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Helen. Thank you for having the courage I didn't. Because of your bravery, I can finally sleep in peace, knowing that woman can't hurt anyone else." I hugged him tightly, feeling a deep connection with this man who had shared my pain. "Thank you too, Edward. Your testimony was crucial. Without you, maybe Veronica would have continued to be free, destroying more lives." We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. We had formed a friendship born from shared suffering, but also from a shared victory. The following months were a time of slow but steady healing. Ruth was by my side every step of the way, helping me rebuild my life. I decided to sell the house where I had lived for so many years because every corner reminded me of Matthew, of the happy moments that were now stained by betrayal. I bought a smaller apartment in a building with other residents my age. It was a new beginning, a blank page where I could write a different story from my golden years. I also decided to do something meaningful with my experience. Together with Edward and with Jessica's support, we created a support group for seniors who had been victims of financial abuse by family members. We met once a week at a community center and shared our stories, our pain, but also our victories. I discovered there were many more victims than I ever imagined, people who had been robbed by children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews, and who carried the shame in silence. Our group gave them a safe space to talk, to heal, to reclaim their dignity. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Matthew from prison. I held it in my hands for days without opening it, unsure if I wanted to read what he had to say. Finally, one quiet afternoon, as I was drinking coffee on my new balcony, I gathered the courage to open it. The letter was full of apologies, of regret, of pleas for forgiveness. Matthew told me he had started therapy in prison, that he was trying to understand how he had reached that point, how he had allowed greed and manipulation to destroy the most valuable thing he had, He told me he didn't expect me to forgive him, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but that he needed me to know he spent every day of his sentence thinking about the damage he had caused me. I read the letter 3 times before putting it away in a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe I never would be. Forgiveness isn't something that can be forced or rushed. It's a personal process, one that everyone does at their own pace, if they do it at all. For now, I was focused on healing, on rebuilding my life, on finding purpose and meaning in my days. I had discovered I was stronger than I thought, more capable than I imagined. I had faced the worst betrayal possible, and I had survived. More than survived, I had thrived in a different way. One afternoon, almost a year after all the drama, I was sitting in a coffee shop with Ruth and Edward. We had become an inseparable trio, united by our experiences, but also by a genuine affection for one another. Edward looked at me with that warm smile I had learned to appreciate and said, "Helen, do you know what the most ironic part of all this is? Matthew and Veronica thought that by robbing you, they would take away your strength, your security, your future. But the only thing they accomplished was showing you how incredibly strong you are. They took your money, yes, but you got back so much more than that. You got back your dignity, your voice, and your power." His words struck my heart because he was right. I had lost my son, at least for now, but I had found myself. That night, back in my apartment, I sat in my favorite armchair with a hot cup of tea and looked out the window at the city lights. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had lost, but also everything I had gained. I had learned that unconditional love does not mean enabling abuse. I had learned that standing up for what is right sometimes requires agonizing decisions. I had learned that family isn't always who shares your blood, but who stands by you in the darkest moments. And above all, I had learned that it is never too late to be brave, to defend your dignity, and to start over. I smiled as I took a sip of tea and thought about the words I had once said, words that had become my mantra. Today I am alone, but for the first time in years, I am at peace. And that is priceless. Life had taught me that sometimes the price of peace is incredibly high, but it is always, always worth paying.